Aha, recording in progress. Okay, so here we go. So I'd like to introduce Ms. Kim Shaw, who is the Executive Director of the Triangle Nonprofit Volunteer and Learning Center. It's a long name, and I hope I got it right. She has more than 30 years of nonprofit leadership experience in board development, strategic planning, marketing and communications, fundraising, human resources, and finance. So we have a definite expert here, and we are so glad to have you. Thank you so much for your time today.
So good morning. Yeah, good morning. And 30 years. So that means that I started working with nonprofits when I was 5, right? Right. Yes. So good. I'm glad you all joined us today. And our topic, if you work with a board, is just such a fun topic to talk about. And I hear this from a lot of executive directors that we work with, but just a couple of things about our center. So you almost got it right, Bryles. I'll give you a 98 of that, but it's the Triangle Nonprofit and Volunteer Leadership Center. Although hopefully you learn, so that was close. That's why you got very close to 100%. But for more than 40 years, we were the volunteer center. And we did so much work with nonprofits, and we would get calls from nonprofits in Wayne County and Orange County and Durham County, and they would say, well, we see that you do this. Who does that with us? And who works with nonprofits? And we would go, we do. And so we finally decided we needed to change our name so that it reflected more of what we do. And that was just a marketing strategy that we took on. But we've been working in the Triangle community for more than 50 years. In fact, this is our February the 7th was our 50th anniversary. So now I can say over 50 years. But in addition to doing some of the things like today, where we're going to do nonprofit training, we are a volunteer center, and we have the largest volunteer database in the Triangle. We also do a lot of youth volunteer programming and some specialized programs with our the social services department that we've had a contract with for 40 years, where we do some Christmas distributions and Thanksgiving and other things. So there's a lot that we do, but we've got a pretty full program. And so I won't talk really a lot about us. We'll just hop right into this training, and and it's building your board. So I'm assuming most of you on here have a board, or not, but I assume most of you would. So we're going to talk about some practical ways that you can recruit board members, but also to keep them engaged in the programs that you have with your organization. So we're going to start off with and everyone can see my screen okay? Yep. So the first is we're going to start with a poll question. So with your organization, who's responsible for the recruitment of board members? And it's a single choice, really. So it might be it might be a mixture, but in general, the majority of the effort is who? You guys are fast responders.
Okay, we've got 85% participation. 3 people haven't participated. Oh, that could probably be us. Okay. All right, Kim.
Yeah.
Yep.
That could be us.
That could be us. All right, here we go.
Very good. So it looks like the majority of you, that all board members make recommendations, and that's really good. And that about 25% of you have a committee of the board. So that kind of leads into, I'm kind of surprised that the executive director doesn't have a lot of agencies that I hear from say, I'm having to do a lot of the board recruitment. So we're going to talk a little bit about this in our next few slides. So we can start sharing that poll. And so I'm not sure which screen they're seeing right now. Maybe I can close that down. Okay. So one of the things that we recommend for board recruitment is that you have a very active board development, and or you can call it a board relations committee, but that you have a committee of folks that are your board members that are focused on the recruitment of board members for your organization. And that committee can do many things. So this is a long list of things that that our board relations committee does. But the first three things that are relevant to this session that we have today are that, first of all, this committee would prepare the criteria and the priorities for who's going to be on the board. So if you need an attorney, or if you need some representation by the university sector, or whatever it is, that this committee would then work on what are those priorities. They would also then identify candidates that meet that criteria. And they should help to meet with and review all of the different documentation that you would want to share with board members. Now, our board development committee also does, they recommend a slate of officers to the board. They conduct orientation sessions for new board members and organize training sessions for the entire board. They oversee a board evaluation process. And I don't know how many of you do this, but we found that it is a good practice. I don't know if so.
Is now a good time for a flare up? Stelara can provide relief and is the
You're muted.
medication to reduce inflammation on and below.
Someone muted me. Okay. So can you hear me now? But we have someone that's not muted.
Yeah, I can hear you. Anita, can you mute, please?
If you need a vaccine, PRAS, a rare potentially.
Okay, so a lot of our committees, what we'll do is we will also recruit non-board members for all of our committees. All the committees have to be populated by board members, but we also invite non-board members to participate in some of the work of the organization. So, for instance, if you have a marketing committee or a fundraising committee, you could invite other members in the community that are strong in those areas and can help make the work of that committee a little more robust. But by doing that, you're also introducing those community members to the work of the organization. And in a way, you're starting to prime them for potential board membership. So they see what you're doing, they like what you're doing, and then you've got a built-in referral system for some of the folks that serve on your committees. So generally, the board relations committee would have a chair, of course. Again, current board members, non-board members, and for most of your committees of the board, you would want to identify a staff liaison. And for your board relations committee, I would suggest it be the executive director. So poll question number 2, what is the length of time for board terms? And the second question that we have on there is, how many terms can your board members serve? Okay, looks like everyone's answered, or 17 out of 17. So the majority, looks like the majority is 3 years. And that's a pretty common length of time for a term. 1-year terms are difficult in that someone barely gets to know your organization before they're rotating off. So having a 2, 3, or even 4-year term is pretty common. And that's interesting. And so someone has 3 people have no term limits, so they can serve forever. We'll talk about some of those ramifications. And if you do have term limits, how many terms can they serve? Looks like the majority are 2 terms. So you have the possibility of having someone on your board for 6 years, 9 years. And I'm going to stop sharing that part. So one of the, if this was if we were live, I would ask, what are some of the positives of having a pretty long term, and then what are some of the negatives of having a pretty long term. And one of the things that I would suggest is if they're really good board members and they've contributed a lot to the organization, of course you want to try to keep them forever. But one of the benefits of having term limits is if you have board members that are unengaged or not as productive as they could be, there's a natural way to kind of rotate them out of the system and bring in new blood. And it's always good to bring in new folks to your organization, because a lot of us, nonprofits, we go a million miles an hour, try to do 1,000 things. And sometimes you just kind of keep doing the same things, and you have some fresh eyes that can come in and look at what you're doing and suggest some ways to maybe be a little more effective. So having a strong term policy and being able to rotate those is an important part of having a vital board. So in this example, and how that works, it looks like a lot of you do this already, but there's sometimes when I'm talking to nonprofits where they don't have term limits, and they're like, well, why would we do that? So this would be an example. If you've got a 12-member board and they're 3-year terms, what that would mean is that you would be recruiting 4 new board members each year, so that you would always have a core of folks. So you'd have 8 board members that were experienced somewhat with your organization. 4 would rotate off, and then you would have 3 new ones. So this is probably a little too small for most of you to see, but that first year you would have 12, and then you would have 4 that would rotate off. You would bring 4 new ones, and so you would always have some fresh folks coming into your organization. So hopefully that kind of makes some sense. I'm going too fast forward. And it sounded like a lot of you already do this, so I won't spend a lot of time on the board rotation, but it's an important thing to do, and building that into what the expectation is for your board service can also make a difference. If I saw someone say, 3 people say they could serve forever. So if you're recruiting someone to serve on your board, and people are busy these days, and if they say, what is your board term? If you say, well, you can serve forever. Exactly, Andrea. They would go, holy cow, I don't really want to serve forever, but yes, I can serve 2 years, or I can serve 3 years. So it also gives your board members, when you're recruiting, a reasonable expectation of what you're looking for, and they're more likely to say yes. So I think we come to our next poll question. I can't wait to hear what you guys say. So the biggest challenges with your board, and you can pick several. You probably will pick several. So if we can throw that poll question up. And Daphne or Bryles, I'm not seeing the poll. Yep, there we go. Nope, next one. One more. Yes. So the biggest challenges with your board, poor attendance. Board members aren't attending your meetings. The board's not very responsive. They're not supporting you financially. They're not engaged. It'll be funny if we get answers on all of these. Board members don't come prepared to the meetings. They get too involved in the management. They're not comfortable talking about the organization. perhaps they have some conflicts of interest or misguided motivations. They're not aware of their roles and responsibilities, or their other issues. And the ones that put other, I'd kind of like to hear, maybe put in the chat what some of those other challenges were. And what we'll do is we're going to stop a minute after this poll and discuss a little bit about that, so I can hear some of the other, if you guys put that in chat. So is this 17? Looks like maybe that's about everybody. 18, 19, I can count. Okay. So I think that's good. So let's start talking about this a little bit. Looks like the number one challenge that you have with your board might be that they're not engaged, and that can mean a lot of things. And coming on the heels of that is financial support. Oh, we'll talk about that. And lack of awareness of their roles. Yep. And responsiveness, and not comfortable talking about the organization. Okay, so are there any, Daphne, are there any things in the chat that that address those? I guess I could open that as well.
Yes, Kim, we actually have tons of questions. So the first one that we actually had is, what works when you have a board of only 7 to 10 people?
Well, it depends on the work. So as it relates to rotation, or as it relates, is that what that's in relation to?
I believe so. They didn't elaborate on that piece.
Yeah, so depending on, I'm not a big fan of huge boards. I mean, for me, a sweet spot is somewhere in the 12 to 15 range. But if you're a really large nonprofit and you've got a lot of work to do, a larger board can be helpful, but it also gets more complex. Similarly, a really small board, it's really hard to engage. It's hard to engage board members without them feeling overwhelmed, because there's so much that you expect that board to do. So 6 to 7 members. If there's a rotation, what you would want to do is set that up so that it's an equitable rotation. So if it's a 3-year term, for instance, you would want to do probably 2 to come on you each year, 2 to rotate off. If, you know, I'm not sure what that rotation period is, but just try to set it up where those 7, that's a lot for those 7 to do, and you don't want to burn them out. So one of the things that you'd want to be conscious of is, do we have a board rotation? Just think how difficult it would be if you've got 7 and they feel, you know, the majority of them feel overwhelmed, and you had 5 just resign because there was too much for them to do. So you want to try to think about the overall functioning health of your board. Maybe you need to consider a few more. And I'm not necessarily saying that you should, but just be aware of the obligations that you're asking of those board members. And if you've got, like we've got 5 different committees, and if you've got 4 or 5 committees, then you're going to have board members serve on multiple committees. So you're asking a lot of your board members. It's just being able to structure the work of the organization around the size of the board members. And 7 may be fine, but I definitely would keep in mind doing a rotation, especially with smaller boards. Next question.
Great. Our next question is, and if that board is very inactive, how do you get them invested in finding more active people?
So if that board, if the small board, if the 7-member board, is that the question?
Yes, but from a different person.
So if, active board engagement in committees is the way that we engage our board. And if your board's meeting once a month or once every 2 months or quarterly, whatever it is, it's really hard to keep your board in. I mean, it's hard for me to remember what I did yesterday almost, unless it's really good or really not so good. So keeping your board engaged and the mission of the organization in front of them is difficult if you've only got one meeting that they're going to. So and we're going to talk about this in just a minute further in the presentation, but keeping them involved in a committee is really essential to activating and engaging your board. If there are options, if the board is not engaged, and some of that sometimes is the way we prospect and recruit board members. So we need to do a good job of recruiting folks in the first place. But if they've slowly become disengaged over time, then you might want to think of maybe it's time for them to rotate off. Another strategy is to create an advisory board where they rotate off of the official board, but they're an advisory council. They've been there, they've got a lot of experience, they can inform some of those decisions, and they can serve in another way. One of the strategies that we use is we create board champions. So we list all of the different program areas for our organization. So we have our youth programs, we have our summer camp programs, we have, a plethora of different programs. And we ask board members to choose one area that they would be the champion of. So we spend time making sure they're fully informed on that area and that they feel comfortable talking about that area, and they become vested in that. And what I ask them to do is, if I have a problem or a concern or a new opportunity in a certain area, if you're the board champion in that area, I want to be able to pick up the phone or send you an email and say, hey, we've got this opportunity to expand the program this way. You're our expert on this certain area. I'd like to hear what you think about that. And the more you go to them in a managed kind of way, you don't want to ask them 1,000 different things because that will overwhelm them. But if there's a certain area that they've indicated that they're interested in, and you can go back and chat with them about how can we improve this, they'll become more vested. I mean, we're all more vested in something when someone asks our opinion and then they use it. So that would be one of a couple of the things I would suggest that you might do.
Thank you, Kim. And our next question is from Gail. It says, we are a small volunteer board of 4 with no executive director or paid staff. We currently bring in new board members from our volunteers and program leads. Any suggestions for all volunteer groups?
So it would be kind of the same as with any small board. Don't overwhelm your board. If it's an all volunteer group and you've only got 4 folks, is that a reasonable expectation that they can do all the things that you want them to do? So you might want to consider having more, but if the plan of work, if your scope of work for each of those is manageable, maybe 4 is enough. But again, you don't want to burn out your board. I've been on 3 organizations where it was all volunteer run, and we eventually hired an executive director for one of them because it got to be too much for the board. And so one of the things I would also, was this Gail? I think you said Gail to ask that. So Gail, one of the things that I would do is, when you're recruiting your board, is to be very upfront about what that expectation is. If it's 4 hours a month or 4 hours a week or 40 hours a month, that's something you need to clearly articulate as you're recruiting so that they are okay with that expectation. So for me, one of the very first things that you need to do is to clearly communicate what the expectations are for your nonprofit whenever you're recruiting a board or volunteers or anyone else, staff. I mean, it's kind of HR all the way around. But It may be that you need to have a few more than 4 because you don't want to overwhelm and then they leave. Next.
I believe this is a question, Kim, but this is from, and forgive me, LaCrissa Brown. It says initial recruit board process, and I believe you probably already addressed that question.
Right, and I've actually got a couple of slides talking about recruitment, so we'll go into that.
And those were the only questions for the moment.
Okay, so you remember the challenges of communication and attendance and financial obligations and all of those different things. And so one of the things that I just mentioned was clearly communicating, articulating what the expectations are for the board. So what you can do, and I think this, you don't have to call it a contract. A lot of people just call it an agreement or a memorandum of understanding or a document that says, these are the roles and responsibilities. And so you develop that, and the things that are issues now, or that you think could potentially be issues, or that are just good nonprofit practices, you'll want to include them in this agreement. Sometimes contract scares people off, but it's really just an agreement of, this is what we expect from the board. So you've got problems with attendance. So an example that you might want to have on here is, well, we expect that all board members will attend 75% of all meetings, and maybe it's by phone or it's in person. They're not prepared. We expect that they will review the agenda and the materials prior to a meeting. They're not engaged. Well, all board members have to serve on at least one committee. And then if there are special initiatives that come up or special events, you want them to attend those as well. One of the things that I hear a lot from some nonprofits is that that board members will sometimes get a little more involved in management activities than what they should be focused on. Some boards have to manage the organization. So if you're an all volunteer organization and your board is running it, well, yes, indeed, your board's going to be involved in management activities. If you're a board that's more of a governance strategic board, then you're going to be involved in what are the different strategies, goals, things we can do to further the mission and impact of the organization in the community. Staff's going to focus on management and operations, and we're going to focus on the overall governance of the organization. And a lot of times boards will slide into the management because, frankly, it might be a little more comfortable for them than going out and asking for money or meeting with different stakeholders in the community. So let's see a couple of other things. We ask, and most nonprofits, I believe, should ask, that if you're going to serve on the board of this organization, that stewardship is important, and that all board members are expected to give some sort of annual gift. Some nonprofits, probably many that you're aware of, will have a certain dollar level. They may say all board members are expected to give $1,000 or $500 or whatever number. The way we operate is that we ask all board members to make a gift that's personally significant. So it doesn't have to be, for some of our younger board members, $100 is significant, $50 is significant. And then for others, it might be $1,000. So we ask that they make one annual gift at least, and that it is something that's meaningful to them. One of the other reasons that I stress this with nonprofits is that your board member becomes more vested. I mean, we know we value things more when we have to pay for them, it seems like. But the other thing is, when you're applying for grants and corporate gifts, many times one of the things that foundations will ask, and I think it's happening more and more, is they will ask you, does your board does 100% of your board financially support your organization? And if they don't, what does that tell the foundation? If the people that are closest to you won't support you financially, what does that mean? And so I always throw that out there to my board. You know, I can't apply for this grant until all of you have made your, you know, filled your pledge. And we do, which I'll talk about also, but we do have a pledge card at the beginning of every year. We have annual documents that we ask our board to review and sign off on. And one is, what do they expect to give during this year? So, for any of you that listed financial concerns as one of the challenges, build that into your board agreement. In fact, anything that you have a challenge with, you can build into your board agreement. So I don't have to go through the rest of those because we're about halfway through, I think, and we've still got a lot to cover. But having clearly stated roles and responsibilities for your board when you're recruiting them and taking the time to go over that is really important. There's really nothing worse than recruiting someone to be on your board, and they're supposed to be your advocate and cheerleader and champion in the community, and they feel like they did not understand what was expected of them, and they step off your board, and then they become someone that talks negatively about your organization in the community because that had not been shared with them. They felt like, well, I didn't know this was an expectation, and now they're saying I need to give them $5,000 to be on the board. Well, instead of creating a friend, you've created someone who is speaking, I don't want to say an enemy necessarily, but they're doing opposite of what you wanted. So you want your board to be very tied and a cheerleader for you. This is a board of code of conduct. I'll share that in some of the materials. So the having your board actively adhere to those roles and responsibilities is really important. And this is something that your board development committee can look at. So as you go through the year and you've got board members that aren't doing some things, it would be the role of instead of the executive director, because a lot of times executive directors are put into a position that is not as appropriate as a board-to-board, peer-to-peer conversation. So if your board development committee will go to board members that are not attending, I mean, there may be a really good reason, and they may, have some sickness in their family. There may be some extenuating circumstances, but it's a less awkward thing, because technically, if most of you on here are executive directors, it's difficult for you to then go to your boss who's your board and say, well, why aren't you attending, and why aren't you prepared, and why aren't you giving us money? That's not the position that you want your executive director to be in. That's a position that is a peer-to-peer conversation, board member to board member. Not going to spend time on this because again, I will share this with you, but if your bylaws do not have your term limits, you might want to look at amending and reviewing your bylaws so that you can address some of these issues that are problematic for your organization. So instituting board limits, having a participation policy, having board committees that are institutionalized in your bylaws is an important step to make. I know bylaws scare, they're not fun, but they're necessary in good governance for your organization. So we talked about board committees and how we want board members to be able to serve on at least one committee. That also helps them become really familiar with that area. So if you've got a finance committee, most nonprofits do, or you've got a marketing committee, or you've got a program committee, it's another way to keep your board members informed. And when you're informed, a lot of times you're not vested because you don't understand things going on with the organization. So if you have committees that are active and engaged, and again, one of the things that we do for our board meetings, you might not know it today, but I don't like to be the one doing all the talking in a board meeting. I want our board members to talk. So the way that we have it structured is that our board will meet every other month, and the committees will meet in the non-board meeting month. And then those committees are the ones reporting out to the board. So the majority of the agenda is taken up with board-to-board conversation. Committees making reports, asking their fellow board members, what do you think of this? How can we do this better? Getting their suggestions that can be incorporated in the work of that committee. And, you know, it makes the meetings go by a lot faster. I can see board members aren't falling asleep because I'm talking too much. And, you know, they all feel like they can participate and have a place at the table. Another good nonprofit, a place at the table. I think I mentioned, you know, our first meeting of every year, we have our commitment documents. So we have a conflict of interest. We have pledge cards. We ask the board members to sign up for their committee then. We have that board member contract, which is the roles and responsibilities. And then we have a board outreach plan, which we'll look at also in a minute. But this kind of refreshes them, you know, at the end of beginning of each year. These are the things that you're responsible for. So we present those at that first meeting, ask them to send those to us because we're not meeting in person quite yet. But if they were in person, I would have them out and I would go around and collect them so that we would have all of that. It might be, yes. So were there some questions, Daphne, before we get into the next area?
Yes, Kim, there are a few questions. So our first question is from Alfred, and that's circling back to the contract. Is the contract attached to the application?
No, but it's a separate document. And for our application, we have, and I'll show you this too. We do a board prospectus where we outline the different roles and the responsibilities, but the application is separate. The roles and responsibilities are separate and our prospectus is separate. But you could certainly weave that in there. We just do it separately because we might, you know, everyone that applies might not be on the board.
Perfect. Our next question, Kim, is from Suzanne. She says, our board chair constantly reminds the board to contribute financially. Is that information confidential?
It should be. I mean, it is for us. And that's that's another reason why your board might not be comfortable contributing or doing pledge cards is we assure all of our board members that their information is confidential. We don't even tell we will tell the board development committee will know which board members have not contributed, but they don't know the amounts that board members contribute or the amounts that board members pledge. That information is kept internally. And so it's myself and our bookkeeper that has that information, but no one else.
And the follow-up question from Suzanne is, will only the chair and the executive director know, which I think you already addressed.
Yeah. No.
That is it for our questions at the moment, Kim.
Okay, so moving on. Our next poll question is, do you pre-identify specific needs or experience prior to recruitment? This is a simple yes or no question. So I think we've got 23 of 25, and it looks like the majority of you do, and that's great. That's a good answer. The one that said no, we probably need to work on that, and the ones that say a little, we probably need to work on that a little bit. But you know, so what does that mean when we say pre-identify the needs or experience? And I think it was Alfred that asked the question about having these different documents, I think.
It was Alfred.
Yeah. So at the beginning, usually at the beginning of your fiscal year, your board development committee, if you had one, and if you don't, whoever is responsible for your board recruitment would need to analyze what your current needs are for your organization and what you might need in the future. So, and some of that is also going to include analyzing, what do our current board members bring? And, what maybe are some of their weaknesses? And so, to Alfred's question, on the application, if you identify some of the experiences that that you normally would look for in a board member, you can identify some of those strengths and experiences when you're doing your recruitment. So, I want to talk about that just a little bit more though. So when I say current and future organizational needs, of course, that's going to be in the matrix too. If you're planning a big say capital campaign, you might need to recruit more members on your board that have fundraising experience. I mean, that just kind of makes sense. If you've got board members that have no experience at all, then you may even need to consider expanding your board count or your creating a fundraising committee and recruiting some folks from the community that can help you with that. But it's really important to look at who do we have, and what are we going to need this year and in the future, because remember, these folks are going to have 2, 3, 4-year terms unless they serve forever. And so what kind of skills and experiences are they bringing? So the question about the application. So here's an example of an application, and I'm going to share all of these. We get a lot of our stuff from different nonprofit best practice sites, and we do this training. You don't have to use this, but this is just a good template perhaps for you to use. So of course, you're going to get your contact information. You're going to want to ask them why they're interested in serving with your organization and other kinds of leadership experience that they might have. And then to the point of how we find out what they bring. Can you guys see this? It's kind of small, isn't it? But the skill knowledge area, strategic planning, marketing, board development, fundraising. Do they do special events? Have they done any program planning? Have they done any HR work? Any public speaking? Any finance? And so we have a small little chart here of, are you very experienced in that? You've got a little bit of experience, or you just really don't have much at all. And so this gives you an idea when someone is applying to be on your board, how they're going to help fill some of those needs that you might have that aren't addressed by your current board members. So that's, I would strongly recommend a board application and a board application process. And then for me, this was, I wish I could claim that I created this. I did modify it, but this was something that we got from a grant from Blue Cross Blue Shield. And it has been, we use this all the time. It's an evaluation matrix for our board members. So what we do is we will take this matrix. It's a cool tool. So all of the things that you think your organization needs, or the experiences that you think need to be included, you would populate those kinds of attributes at the top of your matrix. So, we want some opinion leaders. We want to do some things in the community, and we want to have some folks that are opinion leaders, that they've got some nonprofit experience. Finance, market. So all, depending upon what the needs are of your organization, you define those and you populate your matrix across the top. The other thing that we do, and I just think it's really important, is we try to have a diverse board. And so we also identify what their gender is, what their ethnicity is. And because we represent the entire triangle, we have a column on there that also is, where do they reside or work? Because we want representation on our board geographically too, so that we've got a very diverse board. So what you do first is you take your current board members, and we were lucky to have Michelle Obama on our board. So not really, but I made up some names. And so we populated this with, these are these are our current board members, and these are the strengths that they bring. And then what you do is, as you go through that, is you look at where your holes are. So when you're recruiting, say if you are a faith-based nonprofit and you wanted some more representation from faith-based community, well, on this matrix, you've got one person. You know, if you've got a lot of faith-based initiatives, one of the things that you might want to look at when you're recruiting are more potential board members that would have that kind of experience. So this gives you a very visual look at, you know, where are the gaps? And if you've got some things that are new needs coming up, so like I mentioned, a capital campaign, you might want to weight this a little heavier. So you can see that, oh, I'm pointing and y'all aren't looking. Y'all can't see me point. So the very first column on this matrix is your ability to weight those, so that maybe you're always going to want to have some fundraising experience. But in the next 3 years, if you've got a capital campaign going on, that becomes something even more important. So you can weight these as well by, you know, what's important or not important at that point in time with your organization. But it just becomes for me, it's just a very useful term. And we also look at, so we go, oh my gosh, just like most nonprofit boards, we got a gazillion women and no men. So we need to recruit some men. And that might, you know, that might affect some of, if having male representation or having, you know, some Latino ethnicity on our board. And we do a lot in that community. You want your board to reflect the community that you're serving. So that may take a larger priority for you than some of the other things. So it just, again, it's a tool that you can use. I'm going to send you a blank one so that you can use that for your board recruitment efforts. And you know, another thing that I would suggest that you do, if you don't already do, and it sounds like some of you do, is asking your current board for committee member recommendations and board member recommendations, and not just ask, but then act on them. I mean, there's nothing, it's kind of insulting to ask someone for recommendations and then you never reach out and do anything. So you're going to want to act on those as well. So maybe, yeah, let's stop a minute and see if we've got a couple more questions. We end at 2, right?
That is correct, Kim.
Yeah, so we've got a little bit more to go through. So let's stop a minute for a couple more questions, because, you know, to me, this was a really important part for you when you're recruiting.
Absolutely. At the moment, Kim, we do not have any questions.
Cool. Okay. So you're going to ask your board again for some recommendations. And you, when at a couple slides back on our annual commitment documents, this is our board outreach document. So we want to hear from our board members suggestions in various different areas. So we say, give us the names of 3 or 4 people or more that you think might be good individual donor prospects for us, folks who can make donations to the organization. And then we ask them, you know, do you want to be involved in it? And how do you want to be involved? Will you make a call? Will you meet with us? Will you write a letter? And also, when do you think we could do this? So it really becomes an annual work plan, sort of, kind of, for your board. So we ask them the same thing for each of these areas. We ask them for individual donors, for board prospects, for corporate outreach ideas, and then folks in the community that they think are community leaders that we need to connect with. And then it just becomes something that we can use as a map, but also our board members have, you know, this is what I've said that I can help with during the year. Another way to engage and keep them vested with your organization. So let's see, recruitment documents. When you meet with someone that's a potential board member, you want to be, you know, professional, be there on time, have your thoughts together of how you want to present your organization. One of the ways that you can do that is to create a prospectus, and I'll throw that up in just a minute for you to look at, which is really just a fact sheet about your organization. They're going to ask you questions about your budget, and any person that would join your board and not want to know about the fiscal health, that would be unusual, because most people want to know, well, tell me, are you in financial trouble? How are you funded? What are your funding sources? And then that separate document of the full list of board roles and responsibilities, because you want them to have a very clear understanding of what you're asking for when they're serving on your board. So on this prospectus, this is an example. We have that set up, and we indicate who our board chair is. So Monica is our board chair, and you put your executive director, your physical address. You're going to want to have your mission there. You want to have a little bit about the history and the overview of your organization, because when they leave this meeting with you, they're going to take, hopefully, they'll take that back, and they're going to read through that. They're not going to make a decision most of the time right there on the spot when you're meeting with them. You then talk about some of the key responsibilities of the board. So board members have 3 terms. They can serve a max of 2. The board membership size is between 12 and 18, but some of the key expectations of your board. And then you populate, here's some of the things we currently need, which will explain to them why you're meeting with them. So for instance, you want someone that has some strong marketing PR skills, and they happen to be the PR manager for their company. Well, that tells them clearly why you're talking to them. But if you identify on here what your current board needs are, then that also tells them, why you're talking to them. So having a prospectus like this will be something that is, most of the board or new potential board members that we meet with are pretty impressed by seeing a prospectus from a nonprofit. They're like, wow, you guys are prepared, which gets back to the first part of what I was talking about, which is having to being professional and being prepared when you're meeting with, even if it's via Zoom. So you would send these documents ahead of time and meet with these folks to talk about, what it means to serve on your board. If you can, it's really, really important to have one-on-one meetings. If they're not in person, then do it via Zoom. But, vetting someone to be on your board without having the opportunity to meet with them, hear their questions, answer their questions, it's something I think that's really important to do that. And then after they've joined your board, schedule some time to follow up with them and let them have time to ask questions before and after. So you meet with them, give them time to digest it, follow back up with them, ask them if there are any questions. If they join your board, make time to meet with them again within the first 3 months of joining the board. So other tactics that you can use to kind of keep your board engaged. When you're in a board meeting, you're doing board business. It's really kind of hard to get to know board members. Now, our board development committee, we have a board get to know you activity for each meeting. So it's not just an icebreaker, but it's a team building exercise. We build that in, but that's only, 5 minutes, 10 minutes every other month. How well can you get to know someone? And the stronger relationships that you can forge, again, I think they'll be more vested with your organization. So we do periodic board socials. So we'll do 3-4 different board socials a year. We might go watch a Durham Bulls ball game, or we might have a holiday social, but we'll do some things during the year so that they have time to meet each other, not in the board meeting. I talked about the board connection activities during the meeting. We also try to make some of our meetings kind of fun and throw in some trivia, Kahoots kind of activities so that you can do those during your board meetings so that they're a little more familiar with your boards. If you can, bring in some folks who can talk about what it means to be a good board member. I know that I can say these things over and over to our board members, but when you bring in someone from the outside, all of a sudden, the things that I've been saying for 10 years now have weight. They go, oh yeah, yeah, we should be doing that. And I'm going, oh my God, I tell you guys this every freaking month. How come? Why does it make sense now? Board retreats. So we usually do one annual board retreat a year. And we talk about, what's the future holding? How are we going to accomplish it? But if you can, try to do a board retreat that is a little longer than a meeting. We talked about doing an orientation for all your board members. Not sure how many of you do board report cards, but your board development committee can help with that. We discussed maybe having a champion for different program areas so they won't feel so overwhelmed. They can focus their time on learning a certain area. Anyway, I'm got 2 minutes. No time for questions. I'll send you this, but there are some cool tactics that you can do to keep your board engaged. So I'm going to end this now so that there's at least a few minutes for some other questions.
And we're waiting, Kim. I do not see any questions coming through at the moment.
Cool. Well, if anyone wants to actively ask a question instead of chat, we can do that too, if y'all can do that. But
are you able to send a copy of the application form?
yes, we're going to send you all of the forms that I reviewed today. You're going to get all of them.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Yep. I did that good of a job that there are no questions. Holy majoli mamoli. Or that bad of a job. Yes.
You are amazing for sure. It was fantastic. So anybody last minute before we wrap up?
I guess my quick question is like, all of this can apply to nonprofits as well, or not nonprofits, but for-profit organizations?
Yeah. It's a lot of governance is just about good, at least as far as volunteers and board members are volunteers, is really just good HR policies. I mean, almost everything that I talked about today would be something that you could apply as for a staff person or a volunteer. They're just kind of sound HR policies. Well, it's been fun. And you guys, one thing I didn't bring up as I've got a moment, we do a training for nonprofits called the Service Enterprise Initiative that the governor's office supports. They provide a grant for nonprofits to go through this. It's a training from Points of Light that they estimate the value at $5,000 to $10,000. And because the governor's office provides underwriting for that for nonprofits, it will cost even the largest nonprofit, the upper window is $300, and you can send 4 or 5 different staff members to go through this. But it's 16 hours of training. We've set it up where it's 2 hours a week. It's virtual, but it is a really intense training of how to think through how you can change your organization to utilize skilled volunteers in your organization. So a lot of folks go, well, I can't have a volunteer marketing director. I can't have a volunteer finance director. Well, yes, you can. And if you are using skilled volunteers throughout your organization, you're going to be able to use more of your program money for programs that will make an impact in your community. So the Service Enterprise Initiative, we're recruiting folks for the April cohort, and then we'll have one in the fall. And hopefully we'll have money starting after September 30th, but that's the funding for this year. And so any of you that are interested in going through the Service Enterprise Initiative, you can send me an email, or it's on our website. Our website is thevolunteercenter.org, and we would love to have you do that. Our sister organization in Winston-Salem, Hands On Northwest, also does the Service Enterprise training. So between them or us, you should be able to go through that training in the next few months, if that's something that you're interested in. I'm done.
And there are
That's
just two
great.
parts we want to share also. Thank you, Kim, so much. You were amazing. We want to let everybody know, please see the Volunteer NC YouTube channel for previous Lunch and Learn discussions. Today's Lunch and Learn will be available on the channel tomorrow. So it is in the chat. And also, if you will help us all out, please complete our survey for today's Lunch and Learn. We value your feedback tremendously. Thank you.
Thank you.
As I was on mute, sorry about that. Yeah, and one quick thing. First off, Kim, thank you so much. This was such good information. And thanks everybody for being here. What a great, great group of folks who had a lot of excellent questions. And Daphne, if you don't mind just popping in the Volunteer Center's email address, so website links so folks can find the information on the SCI trainings. Kim, if you want to also, send some information on that, we can send it out tomorrow. Yeah, so tomorrow what we'll do is send out an email to everybody, follow-up email with the survey link, the recording link, also all of the materials that Kim has mentioned and her presentation. So that will come out and tomorrow. And just to let you all know, our next Lunch and Learn is going to be on March 15th. It's from 1 to 2. And Mike Sweeney, who is also from Triangle, will also be presenting this on training staff to lead and manage volunteers. So we're really super excited about that. And thanks everybody. We really appreciate your time. And Kim, thank you. You're fantastic. And everybody have a good afternoon, and feel free to reach out, to any of us, because we'd love to hear from you. All right. Thanks
Bye.
everybody. Bye.